Airbnb. You should be a millionaire, shouldn't you? Because that is what you're always reading. But I tell you what, it is very, very interesting what's happening. People are slowly starting to get back into it. We're talking about opening up the borders, but that dream may not still be alive, and there's a lot of people out there who've given up on that dream. If you want to know a little bit more about it, watch the full video.
Now, something we touched on last week, and I see there's a question here again, and it also relates to one of the articles we've got. We talked about, and I sort of mentioned this in terms of short-term rental supply. Yes, our listing stock went up quite dramatically last year, and I've had opinion that it was artificially raised by the number of short-term rentals that were thrown into the long-term pool. I think, Jack, you and I were talking about this, and what is the outlook on this market? What's happening and things like that?
Yes, Greg, you're definitely right. So last year, when the international border closed, we've seen a lot more the new listing for long-term rental, which is a furnished apartment. All of those furnished apartments used to be the short-term accommodation, the short-term rental. Obviously, we've seen like the pandemic and the lockdown has the huge impact on the short-term rental market. Lots of the landlord, they become struggling because the short-term rental is become vacate, and the income from those short-term rental property has dropped dramatically. So it's some struggling. The landlord has to put the property onto the long-term market, which you mentioned before, the filling the long-term listing stock market a lot. But I think it's currently, and we have lifted the restriction, and also the interstate border has reopened. I think the recovery is slowly, we're seeing some recovery.
Oh, that's excellent. I think there might have been too many, I don't know, but yeah.
It's, we're saying like the recovery started, but I will say it will be slower than what we expect. So I think the major reason is number one is some of the landlord, because they put the property on the long-term market, it's being rented out as a fixed-term lease. So they have to wait until the fixed-term lease ended, then they can put the property back to the short-term market again. The second of all, we've also seen a lot of the landlord, they put the property for the long-term lease, and actually they're very happy to enjoy the long-term lease rather than the short-term, because they feel like they far less the stress to doing the short-term the rental at the current market, because we still have some uncertainty there. And also the most important thing is, even we've seen the state borders reopening, so it's the Victorian, we can traveling to the New South Wales and a different state. But we're gonna remember this, maybe at least 50% of those short-term rental business are from the international travel.
Sure.
So the border, the Australian border is still closed unless you are the Australian residents and the citizen, which is also the fully vaccinated, or maybe you're the international traveler who has to be the fully vaccinated from either New Zealand or the Singapore, then you can enter into the country. Otherwise, you can still not traveling into Australia. Plus, I think recently we've seen the news, the government has delayed to the international students coming back. And all of those things, I think maybe we're still not that confident to say the quick recovery of the short-term, the short-term market. And also, I think it's the last things I want to mention, because I saw the news this morning. Australia had 37, the Omicron, which is a new strain of the virus and coming through. This is potentially maybe created some sort of uncertainty for the international travel. I think that's also maybe another reason will be affect the recovery of the short-term accommodation market. So generally speaking, we've seen the recovery, but I think it's on the very slow pace.
Yeah. I think on the positive side of that, Jack, when you actually look at the volume of the short term that was available, and that has been taken up, taking into account all these terrible things that have happened and the lockdowns, and yet those properties have been leased and we've seen vacancy rates drop. I think that's a very positive thing regardless. So when things can get, I guess, semi back to normal, I foresee things, whether it's long-term, short-term, I can see some positive things for us.